All right, man, peace. Brothers, I remember when I first started watching NFL football, and as a small child, I was a 49ers fan. I was a big fan of Joe Montana and Jerry Rice and a lot of the great players on that team, John Taylor, etc. But I remember even back then, back in 1990, the big controversy was Joe Montana versus Steve Young. When was Steve Young going to become a starting quarterback? And by then, Bill Walsh was no longer the head coach. George Seifert was the head coach. But you could tell they were still looking for that inroads, that route to start Steve Young. And when you do any history on the 49ers, Bill Walsh actually wanted Steve Young to become the new starter from back in like 87 or 88. Because he was one of those forward-thinking head coaches, a lot like a Bill Belichick back then. He wanted to get rid of you before you started to age. Or like a Danny Ainge of the Boston Celtics, the general manager of the Boston Celtics. That's his mentality. Get rid of you before you get too old. Bill Walsh was an advisor for the 49ers when he told them that they should get rid of Jerry Rice back in the late 90s. And Jerry Rice was truly irate at Bill Walsh for giving the 49ers that advice. That's why he decided to go over to the Oakland Raiders, basically stay in the same vicinity and be a bane to the 49ers as their team's success started to go down the drain. Point being is this: you're always going to have that issue when you have a great incumbent quarterback and a legendary quarterback currently starting. There's always going to be that tension. And that's what happened in the mid-2000s on the Green Bay Packers between Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. I remember when Aaron Rodgers was drafted, and the media was creating that tension from the get-go because anyone could see that Brett Favre was starting to decline. He had led the NFL in interceptions multiple times, and you had this blue-chip prospect waiting for his opportunity. Well, not only did Aaron Rodgers replace Brett Favre, to me, he's about twice the quarterback that Brett Favre ever was, and I'm sure that certain people will disagree. I think that Favre had a little stretch in the mid-90s where he was non-pareil, but other than that, he's been up and down, and fortunately for him, he had the support of most of the NFL commentators and pundits who continued to praise him for whatever he did. If he threw 4 interceptions, it was because he was a riverboat gambler. If he threw 4 touchdowns, he was the greatest quarterback ever. So basically, he couldn't lose. So anyway, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Although Aaron Rodgers may be considered the best in football, but is he even the favorite in Green Bay? Remember how beloved Brett Favre was 16 years at Lambeau, the face of the league, All-American boy next year, and he brought the Pack to 2 Super Bowls, winning 1 and losing 1. Stephen A. Smith, I'm starting with you. Why isn't Rodgers embraced like Favre in Green Bay?
Well, that's pretty easy to answer. That's because Aaron Rodgers comes off as an elitist from the West Coast. Someone who wakes up early in the morning and drinks tea and reads the Wall Street Journal. Brett Favre, his image was somebody who woke up 10 minutes before the game, got on his motorcycle, got to the game 1 minute before kickoff, threw on his jersey and his pads and everything like that, and then just ran out during the national anthem and threw for 400 yards. That's how the media tried to sell Brett Favre. And Rodgers, I think, is far more unrelatable because of his intellect, which is very apparent. Intellect tends to alienate people. It does not tend to bring them in or create that bond or that level of affinity with quote-unquote so-called regular people. And I think that the people of Green Bay, they more liken themselves unto Brett Favre. People who wore trucker hats and flannel shirts, Wrangler jeans and shit like that. You just don't get that image from Aaron Rodgers. Now, who the true person is, who knows? But the image of Aaron Rodgers is as someone who's hyper intelligent, someone who can be reticent to open up to people, relatively super liberal, or at the very least liberal in his ideological leanings. And a lot of those things don't tend to jibe with the image of Wisconsin.
Because Aaron Rodgers didn't pay as much attention to controlling narratives and engaging in media manipulation the way that Brett Favre did. Brett Favre, I mean, it got to a point where it was embarrassing even on the part of pundits and commentators listening to them.
I agree, especially with that fat-ass John Madden. Every time he did the Green Bay game, you'd think that was his son playing.
Here talking about Brett Favre. Oh, look at him trip over his offensive lineman and throw the ball underhanded. Oh, look at him jump into the arms of his offensive lineman. The little kid is still there in him. It's never left him after all of these years. Isn't it wonderful to see That's what you saw.
That wide receiver right there who just caught the football is Shannon Sharp's brother, Sterling Sharp, one of the great receivers of all time. Unfortunately, his career was cut short by a neck injury. Interestingly enough, Brett Favre was able to take a step to the next level in regards to his development as a quarterback after Sterling Sharp could no longer play, because Brett Favre would always just zone in on Sterling. After Sterling was no longer there, Brett Favre was forced to spread the football around, and it made him a better quarterback in the mid-90s.
About Brett Favre. With Aaron Rodgers, the closest thing that you saw to him in terms of histrionics was him doing the discount double check. That's about it. Outside of that, you know what? He just went out there and performed considerably better than a great Brett Favre. Aaron Rodgers, think about this. Brett Favre, quarterbacked in the NFL for 20 years. Threw for over 70,000 yards. Fair enough. 508 touchdowns. 336 interceptions.
That doesn't matter, Stephen A. Smith. He was a riverboat gambler, remember?
He was a gunslinger. He was courageous. He made things happen, but he also killed himself as well. What happens? A 1.5 ratio, in terms of touchdowns to interceptions. Aaron Rodgers, 313 touchdowns, 78 interceptions. That is a better than 4-to-1 ratio.
Well, look, the fact of the matter is this. If we're just going to go by pure stats, Aaron Rodgers is by far and away the greatest quarterback of all time. But we also have to factor in errors. We have to factor in playoff success and things of that nature.
This brother is on another level. He is something special. He is better than Brett Favre. Always has been. Always will be. But in today's generation, particularly with the advent of social media, even though it's grown exponentially in the Aaron Rodgers era than it ever existed in the Brett Favre era, Brett Favre did a masterful job of cultivating relationships and ingratiating himself with the media at large. And
yeah, he was relatable. I mean, let's be honest, Stephen A. Smith. He was relatable because he came off as a dumb hick. He came off as that guy who was the fun guy at the kegger. Aaron Rodgers comes off as the guy who would not show up to the kegger. He'd be at home reading Immanuel Kant.
Plus, he's a bit more personable. He didn't come across as private, even though one could argue he has been. And that is the reason why the faithful in Green Bay has delivered. Not to mention the fact that there was a long drought between when Green Bay was winning championships in the 60s and when Brett Favre, along with the Minister of Defense, Reggie White, and those boys helped deliver a championship back to Lambeau Field. And there was obviously a significantly shorter gap between Brett Favre delivering the Super Bowl and then Aaron Rodgers ultimately doing it in 2010. So that played a role in it as well. But ultimately, it's about the narrative. It's about ingratiating yourself with the media at large. It's about cultivating relationships, being perceived as a bit friendly or whatever. I find Aaron Rodgers to be one cool brother, you understand, who just goes out there and is an absolute assassin and doesn't mind telling you to go kick rocks and mind your business because I've done my job and I'm not interested in really ingratiating myself with you. I'm not trying to offend you or disrespect you, but I'm not interested in really cultivating a relationship with you. I think that's what has been held against Aaron Rodgers, and that's the reason why Brett Favre has received significantly more love than him.
For the most part, I agree with your evaluation, Stephen A. Smith.
I don't think it's just about media manipulation on Brett Favre's part. I think this is who these guys are. At least, you could say, well, it's the way they project their images in the media. But I think there's something in there that people pick up on. So that, look, Aaron Rodgers is better than Brett Favre. Brett Favre on his own. I love Brett Favre. Love watching him. Love for him to be the quarterback of my team. He's one of the all-time greats. He was always overrated by the media.
Absolutely. Great point, sir. He was always overrated by the media, but I also think that Brett Favre came along at a time where there was a dearth of great personalities at the quarterback position. Joe Montana was on his way out, and pretty much throughout the mid-90s, what you had was Steve Young, Troy Aikman, and John Elway. You also had a little bit of Dan Marino, even though Dan Marino was on the downside. And Brett Favre came in and just took the NFL by storm, particularly in regards to his riverboat gambler mentality, his great arm, and his outgoing personality. And he really enraptured John Madden. Once again, you cannot underestimate Brett Favre's rise in regards to overall appeal and the notion that John Madden was so infatuated with this with this dude, man. I've never seen a sportscaster as infatuated with an athlete as John Madden was with Brett Favre.
The media used to actually say it's the greatest quarterback of all time. Never. Never. That was just simply not the case. But he was among the greatest, sure. And he was fun to watch.
Yeah, I'll put Brett Favre in the top 10. So he's definitely one of the greatest quarterbacks ever. He's up there in the top 10. I don't even think that he's top 5 amongst the quarterbacks that I've ever seen, but he's definitely top 10.
Never as good as Aaron Rodgers is right now. Not on his best day. Aaron Rodgers clearly a superior player. So why does Brett Favre get the love? Wrangler jeans, Stephen A. He gives you the sense, Brett Favre, he's the prototypical quarterback that people like to look for. Like, that feels like the right kind of quarterback. Not just in terms of what he could do on the field, but the entire package. The fact that it looks like he's looking to put on those Wrangler jeans and go hunting for his food. He's a good old boy, right? The fact that you mentioned it, he's drawing up plays in the dirt with his stick, and he's going to go out and play. And so if there is an interception, everyone's having fun out there because he also might win the game. And by the way, there's some truth to that. It's not that all that stuff is nonsense, but that's the feeling people are getting. And you take that and you look at the Iron Man streak. Aaron Rodgers has missed chunks of seasons. Brett Favre has the all-time record for consecutive games played, and that resonates, especially in middle America, I think, with that kind of ethos, with that the kind of work ethic and toughness, where you get up every day and you put those jeans on and you go do your job, whether you're hurt or not. All those things about Favre resonate, and it's not a knock against him. That's just what it is. And Aaron Rodgers is introspective, and he comes across as intelligent, and I think in football circles, especially at times, that can be read as effete, as removed, as distant. And by effete, I mean you're self-reflective and
or that you consider yourself to be above it all. That's truly what you're getting at, Max Kellerman, and I agree with you to a degree. I think that certain times when people can evaluate situations at a higher level, it's going to permeate through them, particularly when it comes to their facial expressions, their responses to questions, even in regards to their overall body language.
Effective to the point of, like, inaction. Like, you can't, Brett Favre, man, he might throw the interception because he's not thinking too hard about it. He's just going to let it go. You know, like the rest of us, like what we want to see in our football players. And Aaron Rodgers, he's removed from us. He feels as though he's part of the elite or intellectual.
I agree, sir.
And he's different, and we know that he has a feud with his family that he won't talk about. And he doesn't feel to people like the prototype of what they're looking for in their quarterback, and Brett Favre did. And so he's never really won the affection, at least in Green Bay, I don't think, at least in that neck of the woods, and Packers fans, that Favre won, even though he's more deserving of it because he is the better player.
And it's not even close.
Okay.
That's it, Steve. That's all you got, brother?
Let's go.
All right, that's it. But Max, I'm with you. I picture him with the golden retriever, the pickup truck, kind of like the all-American guy next door.
The all-American guy, a.k.a. a good old boy. The guy next door, really, Molly Karam. If you're living next door to that type of guy, he probably also has a Confederate flag waving. But anyway, that's basically it on that. So peace.